You start recording on your hand.
Yes, I'm doing that already.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining this meeting out of your busy schedule. My name is Musili Adebayo, and I'll be taking you through some basic Excel function that you typically be working with, if not on daily basis, but once in a while. These are tools that I've used at one point or the other, either in Excel or Power BI, and they can be really, really useful. So today we'll be going through these 7 functions in Excel. We have the proper function, and what it does is that the proper function will automatically reformat the text so that all the words are capitalized. So imagine if you have some words that are in uppercase, like they are in capital letter, they are in all caps. What the proper function will do is turn the letter to a capitalized word, meaning the first letter in that sentence will be capital letter, while the rest will be in lowercase. Then moving on to the upper function, I don't know if anybody have used this before. So the upper function basically turn all small case letter, all lowercase letter into an uppercase letter. Then the lower function is something that we can use to convert all caps letter, capital letter, or capitalized letter into lowercase letter. Then we have the trim function. The trim function is something that I've used a lot of times during data tackling. So depending on how your data is collected, you will find that there are white spaces. I don't know if you know what I mean by white spaces or indentation. So there are gaps, unnecessary gaps between your words. You know, when you are typing a sentence, the allowed number of spaces is like 1 space, then the next sentence. But you find out that in some sentences, we have like 10 space between the next word. And that is something that can really affect your data when you're trying to analyze in any way. Then we have the concatenate function. This is something you can use to combine 2 or more strings together. So a common use case that I use this very well at work is when I'm trying to combine a first name and a last name together. So typically in a data set, you have a first name column and a last name column. Then you are trying to achieve a customer name. So the concatenation function is where you can use it. In that scenario, that's where you can use a concatenate function to achieve that. Then we have the sum function. This is something we use almost every day to calculate the total number of integer in the list. Then we have the average function. This is something that we know as that we use to calculate the arithmetic mean. So this is calculated by adding groups of number, then dividing by the count of each number. So without much talking, so let's just get into the practical aspect of this. So this is the small data set we are using. I actually want everyone to be able to see what I'm trying to do. That's why I use the small data set. I kind of curate it together from this Superstore data set, popular Superstore data set. So for this particular data set, we have our customer ID, we have a first name, we have a last name, we have a city, we have a state, we have a product ID, we have a subcategory, we have a product name. And looking at the way this data is formatted, you can see that this is not something you definitely want to work with in analysis. This will definitely not work for you. Then we have the sales figure. So while going through the function now, I'll be showing you a demonstration of how we'll be using the uppercase function and the lowercase function, like I explained earlier. So for the proper function, like I mentioned, I'll be using this next column to show you how to use the proper function. So typically in Excel, before you can call any function, you need to use the is equals to sign. I don't know how many of us are aware of this. This is like a standard procedure with calling a function in Excel. So once I use the is equal to sign, I can always type in the function that I want to call. Excel will typically suggest other functions that bear the same name with it, but I'm trying to get the proper function. And based on the definition that Excel highlights here, we can see that it says the proper function converts a text string to proper case, the first letter in each word to uppercase, and all the letter to lowercase. So a typical example that we'll be using here is the subcategory in this text. So I'll be looking at this subcategory that we have in upper letters. We have it in capitalized word. So I'm going to select the G column, the G2 column here, and I'll close the function to see how it reacts. So we can see that the first letter is in uppercase, while the other letter are in lowercase. This is what a proper function would do for you when you are trying to use it to analyze. So typically, when you go to the edge of this Excel, we can see a plus function that is showing here. And with this plus function, I can either double tap on this plus function or drag it down in order to auto-populate the whole feed. I don't know if we understand this part of this function. Does anybody have any question? Anyone? Okay, I guess there's none. So for the proper function again, I would also like to demonstrate it with this product name. You can see this column here is not properly aligned. Sorry. I'm trying to make this smaller so that you can see. So we can see the product name in this list. We can see it's not properly formatted. So we have the first column, Bush, Somerset, collection, then bookcase. When you look at this data, it's not properly formatted. And when we use this on this particular column, this product name, what it will do is it will make sure that all the text in this column are properly analyzed. So the bookcase that is in uppercase here will be capitalized. So if I go to this column and try to showcase the proper function here again, we'll see that if I pick it, I'm using this equal to function to call the proper function again. I'm picking the proper function and it's asking me to pick the text that I want it to be formatted into a proper case. So I'll be using this. And from our results, we can see that all of these texts are properly formatted in a proper case. While we still have the trim spaces, when we look at the trim function, you will see how I was able to clear all of these spaces that are in between. But for this particular function, the proper function will only try to format the words properly. So for the proper function now, for this particular column, I'll be double tapping on this plus that is showing at the edge of the column, and it will auto-populate. So for this particular product to be formalized properly, we will still have to use the trim function. That is when we get to the trim function and proper function being used together. I will show you how to achieve that. So for this particular function, I think I have done justice to this. Moving on to the uppercase function, using the uppercase function in this instance, Looking at our chart, looking at our data set, we can see a lot of data that is in lowercase that we can transform. We also have this subcategory data that we can transform. Sorry, we have this city, test, first name, depending on which one you want. We can transform this into a capitalized word. So in this case, I'll be using the city column just to give room to this. I'll be using the city column. I'm calling the is equals to function, which is the standard process in Excel. Then I'll be picking I'll be calling the upper function, upper. We can see the definition. It converts a text string to all uppercase. So I'm selecting it, and it's asking me to pick the text. And in this case, the text we are going to use is the city function. With that, I'll close it and I'll press enter. We can see that all these cities now are in uppercase. And when we drag it down, this will populate for all the other fields. Then moving on to the lower function. The lower function. So a typical example of this would be to use the subcategory data that is already in uppercase. All of the text in this column are in uppercase. Then we can turn it to lowercase using the lower function. So I'm going to use the is equals to function to call the lowercase function lower. You can see by the definition, it converts all text in a string to lowercase. Using the lowercase function is asking me to pick the text that I want to convert to a lowercase. Then moving on to the subcategory data, I'm closing the bracket and pressing enter. I've been able to convert the bookcases that were in uppercase, all of them to lowercase. And I'll be using it to populate the field. So I hope this is clear with the lower function. Although another thing that I think I want to show here is this product ID. You can see that the product ID in this case have combination of variable character. We have the letter and we have numbers. So it will be interesting to see how the lower function would work in this case. And I don't know if you can guess already. It will convert the upper letter to lowercase while the number stays the same. Because this function only works on text or string. So I'll be using the lowercase function on that particular column. I'll be calling this equals to function and picking the product ID. Sorry, I did not include the lower function first. And the column, sorry, we are using the product ID column. And I'll be pressing enter. So looking at this, you can see that it converted all the upper cases to lowercase while the number remained the same. So this is another typical example of how you can use the lower function. Moving on to trim and concatenate. So we'll still be using the same data set, but in this particular case, we can see a typical example where we can use this the trim function is this product name. I was the one that made this data to look like this so that we can see how the trim function will work. So looking at the data, we can see that it's not properly formatted from the beginning to the end. We can see a lot of white spaces here. a lot of white spaces that you will typically be cleaning by yourself by using backspace. If you don't use the team function, you'll be using your back button to get it together. And that can take a lot of time if this data cell expand into rows or millions of data. So this is where the trim functions come. So we'll call the trim function here. Trim function for the product case. So how does it work? We use the is equals to call it trim. And based on Excel definition, you can see you remove all spaces from a text string except for the single spaces between words. I'll be using the trim function and picking the H2 column here, and we'll see how it works. We can see that the unnecessary spaces that we see in between all of these texts will be properly formatted. So looking at this, I'll drag this down so that we can see that our text is properly formatted. All the spaces, we can see Noel 322, the spaces that was there before has been properly trimmed to this. We can see backing, the number and the sort. You can see the spaces here has been properly formatted. We can see 01967. The spaces here has been properly formatted with the trim function. Moving on to the next function, which is the concatenate function. So for the concatenate function, concatenate. For the concatenate function, we'll be using the is equals to formula to call it and pick. So for this, I must let you know that there's a concat function and a concatenate function. So in this particular case, is asking me to pick the first text that I want to concatenate. So a typical example is I have a first name and a last name here. I want to combine it to be a customer name. So the first name of this customer is Claire. I'm going to pick it. Then I'm going to pick. So you can see here it's asking me to pick the second text. I'm going to pick the last name of this customer and close it. We can see how the concatenate function works. It combines two texts together. But in this particular case, you want to make sure that between the first name and the last name, there's a space to show. At least this is not a typical name would look like. So we can also include in this function, I'm going to edit it to include space in between the text. And that will serve our test 2. Then this will be our test 3. Then once I include that, we'll have space in between the name. And once I drag it down, this will apply across the field. So with this, I'm able to combine the customer name, the customer first name, and the customer last name together. Another case that we can use to concatenate function is we can use to combine the city and the state. In this case, I will use the same concatenate function to combine city and state. City and state. So I will use the is equals to function and call the concatenate function. In this case, I'll pick the state as my first text. You can see it's saying text 1. Then I'll put a comma. Then I want a space to be in between the city and state. So I'll be using the indentation function to put a space between them. Then comma. Then I'll pick the state. Then I'll close the bracket. And with this, I'll have a city and taste. And in this case, I think what will even work best is a comma. If I were to include a comma instead of a state. So we have Philadelphia, Pennsylvania as the first state. And once I auto-populate the field, so we will have the states, we will have the city and state filled up. So now we move on to the trim and proper function. So I think this is a very good use case. If you remember, for our proper function, when we use it earlier, we were just able to use it to convert words like bookcase to capitalized words. While the trim function, with the trim function, we are able to remove the white spaces. Well, what about in a case where you want to do a total data cleaning? So in this case, we'll be using the trim, the trim, the trim.
Hello, Musili.
Yes.
Sorry to cut you. I think somebody is making a comment that you should zoom out your screen a little. I'm just seeing the message now. The text are very tiny on the screen.
Oh, sorry.
Exactly.
Is it better now?
Yes, it's better now. It's better now.
Okay.
Are you okay
I'm
now,
sorry.
Yusuf? Olasunji Yusuf, are you okay now? Just continue. Continue.
Okay. Apologies about that. So using the trim and the proper function. So we'll be using the trim and the proper function to properly clean this product name. So we'll be calling trim and proper function. So in this case, we'll first use the trim function. I'm calling it, and the proper function together. Then we'll pick our test. So we want this test to be trim and it should be in a proper case. So once I close this bracket, you would see how this works. So it's asking me to include one column. So we can see the application that this has been properly cleaned. So we don't have the spaces that we have before, and the bookcase that was in all in uppercase and now is now properly trimmed to a capitalized word. So if I drag this down across the field, we can see its application. So we can see for this, the spaces that are in between this has been properly trimmed. For self-adhesive, address, label, and typewriter, the spaces have been properly trimmed and the words are properly in. Then moving on to our next function, which is the sum and average. So in this case, so for sum and average, that would only work on the text column. Sorry, on an integer. So we have the sales of each of these items here. So we want to do a sum. Let's call it total sales. So that would be we'll be using the is equals to function to call it and apply the sum function. So in this case, it depends on where you want to put it. So let me just put it under this column here so that we can properly understand the total sales. So we can call the sum function here. So it's asking me to pick a number, or we can pick a range of number. So in this case, we can just pick the range of number here and ask for the function. So let me copy this to get the average. Sorry. I want to get the average of these sales. For this, we will have to do an is equals to and call the average function. You can see based on Excel formula, is saying return the average mean, average arithmetic mean of this argument, which can be a number, a name, or array of reference. So we are going to use the average function and drag it across a list of ranges. And with that, we'll be able to get the average price for these sales, for this range of sales. I don't know if anybody have any question, because I think I'm done.
Okay, thank you very much, Musili. We really appreciate you for taking out your time to come and teach us. It's something that we really appreciate. I don't know if anybody has any question. Please, you can ask your questions now. Is there any topic that is not clear? Because we still have like 27 minutes to go. Anybody? Any question? It's all the topics. Are they all clear? If it's clear, please let me know. Just say yes on the chat session, please. If you know it is clear to you, please just say yes, no, or something. Okay, somebody is saying, can you go back to the trim and proper?
Okay.
Maybe you can just explain that again.
Okay. So for the trim and proper function, so how does this work? So the trim function, like I said, we remove trim and proper. The trim and proper function, like I said, will remove the white spaces that you have. So when we look at this, our product ID, we can see that we have bush, then there's space. So typically, if you give me this kind of data and you want me to work on it, I can't use this data because one is not properly formatted. You can see the way so they were using a capitalized word. So the first letter is in capital letter and other letters in small letter. Then when you get here, you are seeing capitalized word. Then aside that, we can see spaces in between this. So typically, if you give me this, I would be cleaning like this. I'll be pressing back so that I'll now make sure that there's only one space between Bush and Somerset. Same thing apply for the next one. For the Honorable Deluxe Fabrics, I'll be making sure that I am pressing back so that I can know there's only one space. Then in this space too, I'll be pressing back to achieve that. So imagine if I have millions of rows here that I want to properly make the data in this field to be properly formatted. So this is where a trim function would work. So it will remove all these spaces that I'm using back to clean, which I think is not efficient. But the proper function in this case is that despite the spaces that we have, we can see that there are also capital letters that are here. So when you look at this, it's obvious that this particular product ID is not properly formatted, and you don't want to be presenting a data that is looking somehow to the stakeholders. So this is when the application of both trim and proper function will work. So in the trim function, in this case, will be helping me to remove all the spaces that I'm using back to remove. Then the address, I wouldn't have to manually change this and change it to letter and be like address. So that is where the proper function will help me format all of these capital word, all these capitalized word that are in between my data. So looking back to the application here, we'll use the is equals to function to call the stream first. Then it's asking me, what do I want to trim? Typically, if I were to put proper function to clean this data. So once I pick my data, I'm closing it and applying it. And we can see that our data, once I drag it down, this will be properly trimmed. All the spaces that we were seeing in between the data and the uppercase will be properly formatted. I hope this is clear.
Please let us know in chat section if it's clear. So, Musili, you have two more questions now. The first one says, what's the difference between concat and concatenate? Which case can we use them? That's the first question. And the second question is saying, can we combine multiple functions in Excel? What's the difference between function and formula? Please, should I answer that? Should I go ahead and answer that? Hello? I think our network is, I don't know. Hello, Musili, can you hear? Okay, so let me quickly answer the first question about function and formula. Yes. So I think I mentioned this in the first class that we had, that when you talk about function, function is those embedded, we call it implicit expressions that are already in the Excel application. It means that when you install Excel, those functions are already there, right? Now, it's by the time you now use those Excel functions to carry out an operation, that is when it now becomes a formula, right? So it means that, for example, I have trim function. Now, if I don't use that trim function and it's just there in the application, it is still a function in that context, right? But by the time I use that trim function to now carry out an operation, I use that trim function now to now do data cleaning, to transform my data, to trim all the white spaces I have in between my text or my numbers or whatever. By the time I now use that to perform a task, that's when it now becomes a formula. Please, is it clear now? For Israel. Israel, is it clear? Hello, Israel, are you there? Okay. Please, you can answer to the chat session, please. Can everybody hear me? Hello? Okay, thank you. The second question says, what's the difference between concatenate and concat? They are the same thing. I think a particular version of Excel used to be concat before. I think, yeah, am I correct? Yeah, it used to be concatenate before. Let me confirm that, please. Just hold on 1 minute. Concat versus concatenate. Oh, okay. I see the difference now. So concat, right, can only join two things, right? Concat can only join two things, but concatenate can join two or more things. Let's keep it that simple. I hope it's clear now. Who asked that question now? Was it Kafayat Ibrahim? So concat can only join two things. Concatenate can join two or more things. Is it clear to you now, Kafayat? Thank you. Okay, any other person, any question? Anybody, any other question before we end the class? So next week, Saturday, we are going to be having Frank. He's going to take us text function in Excel. He's going to take us how to convert table to a range and range to a table. And also it will teach us data validation. There are two types. It will teach us the standard data validation and the in-cell drop-down type of data validation. So if there are no questions before we go, I think we can call it a day now. So I'm going to stop recording